Hi and welcome to episode 10 of the book chain. This week Claire Fayers interviews Louie Stowell, who has written some fantastic books about myths and monsters and magical libraries, and her new book Otherland is out now and it's a labour of love and I really recommend it. Claire and Louie talk about some fantastic research into myths and legends and the similarities between their books, and I really hope you enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side. Bye.
Hi, and we are live. Welcome to the latest book chain project interview. I'm Claire Fayers, and tonight I'm going to be joined by Louie Stowell to talk about her latest book, Otherland, which I absolutely adored. I love books of magic and adventure, and so this one was really right up my street. And Louie is ready to join now. Here we go. Let's see if we can add her on.
Hello.
Ah, you're there. Fantastic. I said that this worked within seconds yesterday when we practiced it.
I know, it's always the trial that works, isn't it?
There we go.
Just trying to not do this completely up my nose, but
Hi. Thanks for joining me tonight.
thank you for having me.
Here we go. Right. So I think, yeah, we got a few people signing in already.
Excellent. I might just
Who is watching us? Right. Should we dive straight in with some questions?
Let's do it.
Oh yeah. First of all, then, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your book and all your books.
Excellent. So I'm Louie Stowell. I live in London. I used to work in publishing for quite a long time, maybe 15 years, and I've finally gone full time as an author now since Christmas. So it was sort of a pandemic decision, but yeah. So Otherland is actually my second book as a full-time author. I mean, I had my last one of the Dragon in the Library series came out in January, which was The Wizard in the Wood, and then Otherland came out a couple of weeks ago. So it is quite nice to be able to do all the kind of promo and stuff without having to fit in a million meetings as well.
Yes. Yeah, I imagine that it does make it a lot easier. So, can you tell us something about the process for writing Otherland then? I presume
Well, it was a very long process.
You were working at the time you were writing it. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, it's gone through so many different versions. Like I was actually, a teacher asked me how many drafts I normally do. And I gave him my answer on an average of 5, but Otherland's probably been through about 35. I think it's definitely kind of gone through the ringer. It's been different stories. It started off as a time travel story with completely different characters, but just some kind of core elements that was the same. So it's been a long one, but I think one that I found a very personal process. It's definitely been something where I'm kind of exploring my relationship with story, with magical worlds, and sort of asking lots of quite big questions for a fantasy funny story. I guess about what it means to be a hero and what it means to be a protagonist, because actually Rohan was initially the protagonist. And I think what was sort of, went through a lot of sort of interior discussions and discussions with friends about it. And I think in the end, it just felt like, because Myra's so chaotic, that's a very interesting energy to drive a story with, because Rohan is much more orderly and he's sort of, in a way, a story set in fairyland is not where he naturally fits in, because fairyland is so chaotic. So I sort of thought it'd be fun to take the brakes off and turn it into Myra's story, who really cannot be stopped and cannot stop herself.
Yes, I really loved all the characters in it, but especially Rohan and Myra, and that dynamic between the two of them, with Myra who really can't help causing trouble, and Rohan is just constantly worried about what she's going to do next. How did you come up with the characters?
I think so Myra was a bit of a what if, and I was thinking, what if Withnail from Withnail and I was an 11-year-old girl? So kind of Or what if your messiest friend on a night out, the one you have to pour into a taxi at the end of the night, what would they be like when they were younger if you didn't know them then? So I think that's that, like, I guess a character that I could picture as an adult, then sort of bring them back to childhood, and that kind of where that instability lies. And also I think thinking about the joy of that chaos, and that it's not all bad. It's not like, yes, she causes trouble, but there is something to it that's kind of energizing as well. Rohan came a bit more fully formed, I think. And I think that idea of the kind of high achieving, anxious kid is something that probably a lot of people in publishing can relate to. And he's kind of, I think he very much came with his voice as well. This kind of quite brittle, sarcastic, defensive voice of someone who's maybe a bit too clever for their own good, but also very, very worried. And I think, like, Myra is kind of taking the brakes off, and Rohan's more like kind of clutching the steering wheel and kind of till your knuckles go white, you know. And I think as a contrast, they're a lot of fun to write because they're not, I mean, they're not absolute opposites, but definitely there's kind of always going to be tension between the two of them. And not least because I guess without giving too much away, the kind of driving force of the story is all Myra's fault. So I think that's kind of an inbuilt tension. You know, even separate to the personality tension, there's the kind of plot tension as well.
Yeah, I really did like the adult characters as well. I think Myra's mother came across, in fact, Rohan's parents as well, and the different types. So you could sort of almost see how Myra and Rohan got to be the way they were with the parents they had.
I think for Rohan, yeah, just having like an incredibly beautiful, perfect mother is quite a hard thing to live with. Whereas for Myra, it's more it's all about the relationship with their mothers, really. Myra her mother is this kind of like larger than life, chaotic figure who's got clearly a fairly limited grasp on adult life, and how I was trying to think about what it's like if a parent doesn't put any boundaries at all. And actually that's quite scary for a child. So Myra, she's always testing the boundaries because she sort of wants them to be there. And the fact that there aren't any, and when you go to Fairyland there's even fewer boundaries, there's kind of a real genuine risk of her losing herself in there.
Yeah. So have you got a favourite character?
Not really. I think possibly Gloriana, actually, because I think she was just so much fun to write, and I think villains are really fun. And she doesn't think of herself as a villain. She's very much, you know, kind of human morality is stupid and it's not anything to do with her. You know, she thinks the fairy way of doing things is right. But I think someone who is sort of, I guess, like a kind of funhouse mirror of what Myra could be if she had if she had enough power. So I was a big fan of Lord of the Rings growing up, and I suppose in the back of my head was slightly kind of Gloriana is what would happen if Galadriel took the ring and then dropped some acid. So I think it's that kind of evil chaos, and I think that it's really fun to write. And I don't know if do you watch Buffy?
Yes.
Okay, so this was not something conscious at all, but someone else pointed out that she's actually a little bit like Glory. So yes. Gloriana, Glory, kind of. I didn't put that in there on purpose, but I think definitely that was in the background of that kind of. Glory is quite good at sort of holding a mirror up to humans and showing them what they're doing wrong, and I think Gloriana is that too. She's kind of trying to show the children's faults back to themselves just to mess with them.
So you've used a lot of different sort of myth and legend. You've mentioned Buffy, Lord of the Rings, and you go back even further into very old legends and tales of the fairy otherworld, which I'm also fascinated with, and I've written quite a few books using the same sort of source material. So, yeah, why do you think these ancient stories are still relevant today, and that we still enjoy them today?
I think there's always that sense, you know, however modern your world gets, that there's something out there that's not right and isn't nice. You know, there's always something beyond the shadows, something in the dark. And I suppose, you know, the force of chaos itself is something that I've always been interested in, myth and legend, and, you know, kind of Norse myths, the character of Loki, but fairies with their kind of, they were used as a kind of social explanation for bad things happening. You know, like the milk's gone off, it must be the fairies. Something's wrong with my baby, must be the fairies. So I suppose they're kind of, they represent to me the messy bit of life that you can't really explain and that really isn't fair. So and I think with fairy lore, I was, you know, I think growing up I wasn't that interested in fairies because I had the kind of flower fairy presented to me version, you know, and then as I got a bit older I read a bit more about kind of the more sort of folk tale-y stuff behind that, and especially I mean, fascinated, you know, kind of Irish stories and stories from the Isle of Man and then Iceland, where it's sort of, you know, everyone's called it, you know, people call them different things, there's different kind of traditions around them and what they do, but it's that same idea that kind of just through the mirror they're there and they're waiting. And I think I've always really liked visiting places where those myths are closer to the surface. So, you know, places where like you wouldn't build a road there just in case the fairies don't like it, or you have to ask permission. And I went to the Isle of Man recently because my family's from there originally on one side. And that, you know, we went to this fairy bridge where it's like, I don't know, I'm not sure if you're supposed to salute or something like that, but there's definitely kind of that feeling of like, you better behave yourself around here, you know. And so Johnny Squarefoot, who's a very, very minor character, but he's a pig-headed fairy who guides them somewhere, was actually a Isle of Man legend. I think he might have been called Jimmy Squarefoot originally, but I just like Johnny. So I like kind of putting those little, you know, kind of, I guess almost like a walk-on part from a legend.
Actual bits. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, but of course, yeah, in Wales, of course, we have the Dulwich Teg, the fair, literally the fair folk, and the realm of Anon, which is part the realm of the dead and part the realm of the sort of magic of the world. Yeah, and if you put one foot wrong somewhere, and you can suddenly find yourself in another place.
Yeah, I love that idea of that connection with death as well. That kind of, you know, obviously death is kind of like going to another world. I mean, that you can't come back from. And I guess Otherland, if the kids have to do all these various trials, if they lost their trials, then they would effectively die because they'd never come back to our world.
Yes, I felt it also had echoes of Labyrinth. Most imagine David dancing about in his tight trousers again.
Well, I was thinking it was a little bit in my head like gender swapped Labyrinth. Not actually gender swapped because there's no boy. Well, there is a boy, but you know, the main character's still a girl. But it's kind of like, what if that kind of weird romantic tension was with a woman? And I think that kind of element of like sexuality and gender is very much in the background because I don't write about kissing. That's not my thing. But I think that idea of like the kind of powerful woman who you kind of have a crush on, but also are terrified of, in the same way that, you know, David Bowie was probably the awakening for a lot of young people. But yeah, I think what was interesting writing Gloriana, you know, sort of thinking about Jareth in the back of my head is I think I very much wanted her not to be serious. And I think sometimes Jareth is a bit too serious. You know, there's that kind of, or takes himself seriously. And I don't think, and Gloriana doesn't. I mean, she's sort of obviously very self-important, but I think it's what I love about that kind of fairyland is that everything's kind of a big joke, but actually, if you're a human, it's not, because it's your life and it's your sister or your friend. But I think there's that element of, I guess, sort of like, essentially fairies are sociopaths, you know, they just can't understand that things matter other than their ego.
Yeah. Because besides the actual Otherland, your fairy world in the book, you've got this realm of a sort of nowhere. It's the bit between the two, which I found really interesting. The idea that it's all the bits that never sort of happened in our life, and it's almost like a big nothing, and the fairies get really bored there. So,
Yeah.
how did you come up with that and develop that?
I think there's sort of the germ of it in the Wood Between the Worlds in Narnia. But the Wood Between the Worlds is actually quite a nice place, and I was thinking, what if it wasn't? But also, I think a lot of kind of human regret is powered by the what ifs, and I think a place that's 100% what if is actually quite terrifying, because it's a little bit like being confronted with every single one of your failures. So there's this sea in the meantime where it's basically all the things that people wish they could have been but failed to become. I think basically it's kind of like a horror place for me, and fairies in a different way. I think from a human perspective, it's kind of cruel, whereas for fairies, it's just so boring that they want to die. But I liked that kind of instability, because I think fairyland is unstable in a different way, but it's in a slightly more predictable way. Whereas the meantime, sort of anything could happen, which is ultimately quite terrifying. And so then they take, when they take a ride on these birds, it turns out that the birds are actually only made of memories of birds and could fall apart at any minute. And I think that's, particularly trying for Rohan, because he wants birds to stay birds if he's riding on them in the sky and could die.
Yes, it's fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any book recommendations for people who might like Otherland, like your books, and might want to look a bit more at the whole idea of magic and fairies and legends?
So in terms of like the kind of almost researchy side, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so well, I definitely recommend Troublesome Things by Diane Purkis, which is, she's an academic who also writes about the Civil War in the UK, in England. But I guess that whole period of, I don't want to say which century it is because I'll probably get it wrong. I want to say 16th century, but it might be 17th. Anyway, she writes about the kind of folklore fairies and how that maps onto a lot of kind of social conventions around death and disease. So yeah, particularly like those. I haven't read this yet, but I'm very excited about the upcoming The Mab, which is obviously the name of one of the characters, but the kind of compendium of retellings of bits of the, I'm probably going to say this wrong, Mabinogion? No, I can't. You say it.
Yes. Yes, I have a story in that.
Oh, brilliant. I didn't know that.
I got landed with one called The Dream of Boy, which I ended up with, I think, because I was the only person who didn't specifically say, whatever you do, do not give me that story. Because a knight goes out to find a bandit, and then he falls asleep and he has a dream and he wakes up at the end.
Yeah. So it's basically Who Shot JR, but the Mab version.
To take that and turn it into a story. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a fantastic book.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited. It looks beautiful as well. So yeah, and I think I know you are as well, but I'm very into Norse mythology, and I think while that's not specifically fairies, it's definitely that kind of otherness. But also, what I really like about Norse myths is the humanity of it. Oddly, like the characters are they're kind of like people with normal problems. I mean, they also turn into horses and stuff, but they do also like bicker and get jealous, and they're also a lot less, I don't know, like I find the Greek mythology, I enjoy it, and there's parts of it that are great. I love the Odyssey, and I love Odysseus because he's, a trickster. But there's an awful lot of just like men being bad to women, which actually in Norse mythology is not, definitely happens, but it's not really about that most of the time. A lot of the time it's about, people placing stupid bets and getting into trouble and fighting with giants, and it's just a lot more kind of slapstick, really. So I think I don't know, very excited to explore that kind of mythology. But I think also, I mean, with Otherland, I really like the mashup. So you've got I've got gods and I've got fairies, and Actually, I was threatening on the last Insta Live I did to explain the theology of Otherland, so I think I'm going to do it now. Which is basically, there's only one God that features in the story, but I always like the idea that with our versions of religion, we've just got everything slightly wrong. So basically, our visions of, you know, gods and saints and whatever doesn't quite map onto reality. So I've got one God in there who's the God of lost things, who sort of slightly maps onto a Catholic saint, but also has kind of a vibe of a Greek god. And I like that idea that we've just misinterpreted slightly, and they're actually, like the Norse gods, very much their own people. So he's called Tony Toestepson, which I just wanted to put a steptoe and son pun in for like lost things, which I realise no 8-year-old will get and probably no 30-year-old will get, but I like to bury the little Easter eggs, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So are there any other myths that you are sort of looking to explore in your next book?
Yeah, so I'm doing Norse mythology at the moment. So I actually did kind of some straight retellings of Norse mythology back when I used to work at Usborne. And I did it with a colleague, and he basically wrote all the stories about Thor, and I did all the ones about Loki. So Loki is who I'm going to be focusing on next, and his adventures on Earth as he is sort of trapped there in the form of a mortal boy, and has to go to school and do all those sorts of terrible things. So yeah, I mean, it's not a retelling, but it's definitely kind of, let's take all the elements of those myths and kind of repackage them and rematch them up, and also sort of take out my intense hatred of Thor on the story. He's just really stupid. And yeah, whereas I always kind of definitely want to redeem Loki to an extent, but also he doesn't help himself. So I've like, because in terms of kind of researching this and researching Norse myths in general, there's no extant versions of the pre-Christian stories. So all you've got is it filtered through Christianity, and there's no telling exactly what that changed. So there's a certain freedom to that, because it means I can reach for my own version, because there is no real version, you know. And I think, again, with all myths and legends, that idea that they're kind of constantly changing and reshaping themselves is really fun. I don't like anything where there's a right answer and a wrong answer. I like it where you can just make it as weird as you like. But there is something to the core of it, and that Norse myths have a certain core, and fairy lore has, you know, there's certain rules to fairy that, like, you know, never eat fairy food, it's a really bad idea, that kind of thing, where those things come back and back, even if there's a million different versions that take it in different directions.
Yeah, get the same thing. Yeah. But last week I was talking to Amy about, again, because she uses a lot of sort of mythology around vampires, that with serial killer legends in New Orleans. We were talking about the fact that a lot of these things can be quite dark. So
yeah,
is there anything that you would definitely avoid because you just think, no, you don't want to go there?
Ooh, I mean, I was just thinking, like, I think children can handle a lot darker than we think they can. I mean, I'd say probably nothing sexual, but generally, like, most things, I think they can handle it, and the people that think they can't handle it is us. And I was having a great chat on Twitter the other day about, you know, kind of a fantasy publishing company where you could publish all the kind of really dark stuff that kids actually want to read. Because whenever I go and do workshops at schools, and I do kind of story making and things like that, whenever I do like school events, and the kids will just kind of introduce cannibalism almost immediately. It'll be like, how many people's heads can you cut off? So they're, you know, kids are nasty, and I love it. You know, they're brilliant, and because they don't have that filter of like, oh, I shouldn't say that. And I think, yeah, I just think, basically, I wish I could give children the darkness that they crave. And because I definitely read it myself as a child, I read a lot of 2000 AD, which had a character called Slain in, who was sort of loosely based on various legends. And I was introduced to the concept of the blood eagle in that, which is where you get your ribs sort of torn apart. And I thought it was fine. You know, I think you can turn away when you're a kid if you're upset by it, you just stop reading. So I do think they can be their own filter. So I guess, yeah, in answer to your question, there's almost nothing I wouldn't tell for children. And I think part of my experience with that comes from nonfiction, where I've done books on, you know, astrophysics for 8-year-olds and Python coding. And they can, I don't know, children just have an amazing capacity to suck things, to sort of, not suck things up, that makes them sound passive, to absorb more than you think they can handle and process it in their own way. So I think what I would never want to do for children is something twee and something that gives them a kind of false idea of what the world's about, or kind of reactionary, you know, that kind of like nostalgia stuff, which I think is not actually what children want either. You know, that's definitely what, you know, we want. We want to give them the books we read as a kid, but actually, I'm not sure they want that. You know, I mean, they like it because, you know, mummy's happy or whatever. But like, I think generally, allowing children to find what excites them is really important.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So, do you have any sort of tips and advice for people who want to write for children, or for children who are wanting to start writing their own stories?
Yeah, I think basically, like, don't be afraid of being terrible and just kind of write down nonsense. Because I think so much of what people find difficult, and what I've definitely found difficult in the past, is fear, you know, and it's not actually the act of writing that's hard. I mean, sometimes it is, and coming up with ideas and stuff, but normally I think it's just that fear of being bad. And I think one way I kind of cope with that is to actively seek out being bad, and to think of, like, you know, what would happen if I just open my mouth, words come out. And I mean, not the only person to talk about this, but talk about like the vomit draft as the first draft, just because it is like, if you turn off all the filters and quality control, it just becomes a lot easier and more enjoyable, I think. But I also think there's an element of like trying to find what you really like writing about, because I spent a lot of time, I think, trying to write what I thought I should write. And it's just dead on the page, because you don't really want to be doing it. You're just thinking, you know, this is what sells, or this is what other stories have done. And I think it does take a lot, you know, it takes a long time to find your own voice and your own way into things, but I think it's the only way to travel.
Yeah, right. And just keeping an eye on the time there. Well, you've got just a couple of minutes left. So just as we finish, I mean, first of all, thank you ever so much for coming on. It's been absolutely fascinating chatting to you. So you're carrying on the book chain next week. So who have you got? I've got
Annalise Avery, to talk about Night Silver Promise, which I really enjoyed. So I look forward to chatting to her about that. I think it's a really nice thing, actually, to be able to talk to authors about books that you have read, because, you know, obviously I do it on Twitter and stuff, but it is different sort of talking, having that like focused time set aside to say, let's talk about this book. And also, I think, I know as a writer, I often find it surprising how people react to things. It's not necessarily, you know, what people get out of it isn't necessarily what I put in there. It's quite nice to hear those reactions live, and, you know, have people kind of, I don't know, maybe make you rethink or think about how you write in a different way. Yeah, which obviously we couldn't do without people actually tuning in and watching and responding. So thank you, everyone else who's here at the moment. All these interviews are being recorded and will go on to the Book Chain Project YouTube channel. So anybody who's missed any bits can look them up there. And Annalise is there. Hi. Hi, Annalise. We'll look forward to hearing about Annalise's book next week. I'm in the middle of it at the moment. It really is fantastic. It's really good. I didn't spot fan art when I was reading it, actually. It's very inspiring. It is really good. Right, so I think that's all from us for now. I will see you on Zoom in a couple of minutes, Louie, just to do a couple of bonus bits that are going to go onto the YouTube bit for anyone watching that later. So thanks for joining. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye. Bye.
Welcome to Maclay's Jam Factory. the most inventive jam factory in the world, where chief inventor 9-year-old Scooter McClay makes flavours like
cherry candy floss jam,
and
blueberry burst jam,
and.
Brussels sprout jam. Ew.
But wait, what's that? An Alien in the Jam Factory by Chrissy Sains. Buy it now in a bookshop near you.
Right.
Thank
there
you for
we
telling me,
go.
Robot.
Right. So, Louie, welcome to the green room.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for coming in and doing the chat today.
Excellent. Well, we've got a
really interesting conversation. Hello, Doc.
This is Buffy.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's so great to chat. I really enjoy it, and I think that's my second Insta live, and I feel like it's quite a nice medium actually.
It is nice, yeah. I've set up my Instagram account especially for doing this because I
did
didn't have one before. And then I said to my publisher, look, can I use yours? And she said, well, why on earth do you want to use mine? It's like 10-year web. So I think I'll be doing more on it. It is quite fun.
Yeah, it's all right, isn't it? I think I definitely used it a lot over the pandemic for just basically posting pictures of my daily walks. It's like the only thing I'm taking photos of because it's the only time I'm leaving the house.
That's the only time we actually go out. Yes.
Yeah.
So how have things been during lockdown? How's that affected the writing?
You're right. I mean, like I was saying on the chat, it was sort of a pandemic inspired going full time because I sort of had always thought I wouldn't like writing full time because I'd be lonely. And obviously I wouldn't like working from home, and obviously I've had to work from home. And I've realized it's fine actually. And I think it's obviously like pandemic's a good time to kind of stop and think and reevaluate your life and everything. So it happened to coincide with getting a new book deal, which made it possible, and it all just kind of came together. So yeah, I think I feel very lucky that lockdown hasn't really affected my creativity because it's been a whole new lease of life anyway because of the circumstances changing. And my wife's been working from home as well. She also works in publishing, and it's been really nice being at home together. You know, there's something quite kind of comfortable. I wasn't. If I was literally on my own the entire time, it might be different. But I always have an interrupting dog as well.
Yes,
I've
got a pair. Yeah, I have a pair of cats. We actually moved house during pandemic, which is another of those lockdown things because we had always thought that maybe when we retired we'd move up to the Welsh mountains.
Yeah.
And then we were both working from home. My husband suddenly working from home as well, and we thought, why wait for the next apocalypse to hit us? Let's actually go and do it now. So we're now in a nice house with a field of cows opposite, and
amazing.
2 cats getting in the way constantly.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm sorry, I'm getting really distracted by your bookshelves now. I always want to I wish my eyes could zoom in.
Those were that was the bookshelves from the old house. I just put the photo up as my Zoom background because my current office here is just a little sort of nook at the side of the kitchen with no door.
Oh yeah, your hand just disappeared. Okay.
Yeah. I do miss my bookshelves, but when we get the offices properly sorted, we have them. Right, so I've got just a few very quick questions for you to round off. So first of all, if you could only have one type of food and one type of drink for the rest of your life, what would you pick?
Salt and vinegar crisps and coffee. I've actually been asked. I was quite quick because someone actually asked me the thing about the food the other day, and I was happy drinking coffee right now. So I felt like that was a quick
Christmas coffee. Yeah, decent writer fuel.
Yeah.
Right, so you have just met somebody from another world who has asked you to explain what it's like to be a person. You don't have time to talk to him, so you want to give him a couple of books.
Okay.
What books are you going to give?
Oh, that's a good question, which I have not got a ready answer to. I think I would give them Good Omens, because that both explains kind of concepts of religion and human life And then I think I would give. So I want to say being a person, so I need something that has kind of a global perspective. So I'm trying to think of some like very kind of non-Eurocentric history of the world, but I don't know enough history books. So can I just say a history book? And then how many can I have?
Oh, you can have another one.
Okay, we have one more. Then I will give them one of my books just to kind of maybe encourage the aliens to think I'm really important. And then they will spare me.
Well, they ought to.
Yeah.
So if you could only read one book over and over for the rest of your life, what would you pick?
It's really hard. I think maybe a John le Carré, just because I know I have reread those lots of times and they still stand up.
So you can actually, yes, bear rereading them.
Yeah.
If you could turn into any animal, what animal would you be?
Something that can fly. So I guess eagle.
Nice. What's the best piece of writing advice you've ever been given?
This isn't strictly writing advice, it's like event advice. But at my first ever event, Sarah McIntyre happened to be there too. And, you know, I was a bit nervous, and she said, the thing is with children, they're not there to see you, they're there for you to see them. And I thought that would just
very true.
That it's also really true that actually what they want is for you to kind of make them feel special in a way. And maybe that is advice for writing for children as well. Is it like, remember who you're writing for, what you can, you know, I guess what you can move in them and what you can make, you know, can you make their world feel bigger?
Yeah. It is advice. Right. And I think that is that for the green room. We will now allow you to leave through the portal because you have passed the test of answering all the questions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks once again. It's been really good chatting to you.
Yeah, you too.
And I'm sure we will bump into each other at something or other when we're all allowed out.
Oh, when we can in person.
It'll be nice to meet in person at some point.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, speak soon.
Right, bye.
Bye.
Hi, thanks for enjoying this week's episode. Our next episode, Louie will interview Annalise Avery, whose debut book, The Night Silver Promise, came out this year, and it is incredible. Come out with Scholastic. It's first of a trilogy, I think, of epic books about destiny and dragons, and I really recommend you pick it up. So tune in next week or as soon as the video is available. Bye.